All right, so let's solve this intellect thing once and for all, shall we? Point number one. In a Western society, especially in North America, Europe, or any place with a majority of white people have the greatest number of financially successful people and the greatest number of educated people. Never once in my entire life, not even for a moment, have I even thought that it was any other way. Period. Now, you white people, you can pat yourselves on the back or whatever you want to do. If you see that as a good thing, fine. You know, that's you. Feel free to do what you want. Unlike you, I'm not going to tell you what to think or what to say. Other than I would hope you do it with honor and truth. With that being said, once you venture into the realm of which racial group, if you sink to the level of claiming racial supremacy based on this idea. But anyway, once you go to the realm of which racial group is the most naturally gifted with intellect, is the most intellectually gifted naturally, rather. Now you must consider percentages and social factors. That's point number two. Okay, these two things are not directly connected. The first one doesn't equal natural supremacy. Okay, these things are only directly connected in the sense that to figure it out, you must consider the former when you consider the latter. But you must consider a whole lot more than that. Anybody, sociologist, psychologist, Eurocentric, ethnocentric, anyone who does not acknowledge these 2 points should not be heard out. You know, they shouldn't be heard. When you're trying to consider what 1 + 1 equals, if you don't consider the other one, then why should I even talk to you? 1 + 1 = 2 because you consider everything. Every variable, every number that belongs in this arithmetic. Again, because I know there's a lot of you racists who struggle with this. When you are going to consider which racial group is the most intellectually gifted naturally, you have to consider percentages and social factors. Now with that being said, between the facts that intelligence is hard to measure and the effects of social effects on individuals and their academic performance is also hard to measure, I would say it is impossible to definitively prove any one race or ethnic group superior intellectually or as far as intelligence. Impossible. You don't have a valid measure. It's like measure, I don't know, your body temperature without a thermometer, without the appropriate technology, right? I think thermometer might be the wrong word. What do they put in your mouth, right? Measure your temperature, right? Anyway, you get what I'm saying. Well, I'm going to kind of put my hand on his head and kind of say, well, no, we can't measure it. Without the proper scale and measure. Can't be done. Therefore, To be 100% scientific, we do not know which race is superior. Intellectually, which race is more intellectually gifted, which race tends to be more intelligent, impossible to measure. The IQ test is not the appropriate measure. The same scientists who may or may not cite it will say, yes, background and education are important. And what is background? Racial background included. There's cultural factors that have to do with your background and so on. All the things that I talk about. There is no measure for it. Now, if you want to be ignorant, you would say, well, when you look at percentages, West Africans tend to be the most educated group of people, and of them, Nigerians are the bell that rings the loudest. Since there's a lot of social factors playing against them, like they are black, language barriers, cultural barriers, it thrusts them ahead of the pack, way ahead. Asians are viewed more favorably than blacks. So Asians being not far behind them as far as percentages, the percent of them that are educated and that are performing, high performers, high achievers, intellectually, and with their, having degrees and graduate degrees, etc. They go a little bit further behind when you consider that society has a very favorable view of Asians and a very unfavorable view of blacks. However, this is similar to putting your hand on someone's head and saying, well, I don't know, I'm going to guess the temperature. This is not enough evidence. It's inconclusive evidence. It does seem to suggest that West Africans as a group are the most intellectually gifted naturally, but it does not prove it. And that is one of the differences between me and the Scottish right and the ethnocentrics and the Eurocentrics. I say, look, either we admit that we have no valid scale to measure an individual or a group as far as their intelligence, or we play stupid and pretend that we do and then admit that West Africans are the most intellectually gifted naturally, which is disingenuous. I am not disingenuous. I tell the truth, even though I could pretend that my race is superior genetically, intellectually. The only real scales we have is martial arts, and that doesn't show natural supremacy, only martial arts superiority and the forms of intelligence associated with martial arts. We do tend to see that black people outperform whites at sports that everyone does, the most popular sports, basketball and football. But does this really, and we tend to see why that is. Hitler called the blacks animals as far as, their physical prowess, which is not truly an insult when you consider he was considering sports. Animals are a lot more fast and precise than humans tend to be. But, yeah, that's that. Now, there's one more point that I wish to bring up, which is also an ignorant point that people bring up, and that has to do with technology and advancing civilizations, right? Technologically advanced civilizations. Developed nations versus underdeveloped ones. Now, any sociologist or politician or social scientist or political scientist will be quick to tell you that with underdeveloped nations, we see these people come here, they outperform Native Americans. When I don't mean Native Americans like, like the Cherokee or something. I mean Americans born here, right? They tend to outperform, American citizens, natural born citizens, whatever you want to call them. And that shows you that, hey, there's something else going on with the reason why their nations aren't developed. And this goes back all the way back through history, right? To early colonization, ancient colonization. Before you saw dramatic differences in the development of nations, you saw colonization. which included secret societies, clandestine groups, cultural imperialism, oppression, suppression, repression, persecution, and all these things. So you cannot use that as a scale either. It's nonsense. It means nothing at all. I mean, the fact that we have Asians and blacks coming here, and Africans and Middle Easterns, Semites, and what have you, coming here and becoming doctors and lawyers and scientists, and we have countless whites, being janitors and so on with all their white privilege. I mean, it shows you that means nothing at all. How developed a civilization or a country is relative to others over time does not show intellectual gifts, natural intellectual gifts within a race. It's not a measure of intelligence for a race or for a nation. So now that you see this in a very straightforward, unavoidable way, you see that they have to play stupid, Since these people have the numbers and they have the money, they can then turn around and use propaganda to twist these facts and say, well, we are meant to be the master race. That means nothing. One invention that allowed you to gain the upper hand, which you never lost in the last several thousand years or so, means nothing. You say, well, we were able to twist their arm because we had heavy armor and our metallurgy was more advanced than theirs. Our weapons were more advanced. We gained the upper hand, and we started to oppress them and make sure that they would never gain the upper hand over us. And we had secret societies and cults and religious groups keeping an eye on them, having them reveal their deepest secrets to make sure that they could never gain the upper hand. That is not intelligence. That is trickery. If I trick someone into meeting me and I say I'm going to sell them a car and I rob them, it's not me outsmarting them, You see what I'm saying? It's the same idea. If I have technology and I suppress your people and I keep them from being able to compete effectively with mine for thousands of years, that's not showing natural supremacy, intellectual supremacy. That is cheating. That is suppressing. That is underhanded tactics to make sure that my society flourishes and yours doesn't. That means nothing. So the fool would make the argument that, well, why weren't they able to free themselves? If I had your family in a room and I guarded them with gunmen, and I said, well, if you're so smart, you'll figure out a way to free yourselves, even though we have guns and we're keeping you captive. Even though we have guns, we're keeping you captive. We're paying people to dumb you down, It's like saying, well, if the Jews were so smart in World War II, why didn't they liberate the Warsaw Ghetto themselves? Why didn't they free themselves in every concentration camp? Why did they just luck out in one or two or so? Why didn't they free themselves as a people, not as individuals, which we saw, right? We've seen in history individual islands like Haiti and groups of slaves freeing themselves. But as a people, why didn't they, that's not a valid argument either. If I have you fucking handcuffed and I'm watching you with guns and I have fucking people that are in captivity reporting back to me any sign that you might rebel, am I going to turn around and say, well, why didn't you free? What kind of a closed-minded, oppressive fucking knucklehead would I be to say, well, if you're so smart, why didn't you free yourself? That's like me shooting you in the fucking head and you're dying. If you're so smart, why don't you save yourself? Stupid.